Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Jennings, host of the Military Minute podcast. We're glad you're with us today. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, we were actually talking about some things that I didn't think anybody would actually really care about related to our appearances with Military Makeover, Operation Career, and the work that we did with Montel Williams and his crew on that show. Today, we're actually going to talk about what it is that I had planned to talk about as part of this before some of the questions had come in on this, and that is the lesson that I learned from Montel Williams while I was working with him. So Montel's been a pretty public figure, pretty much for anybody who's paying attention to influencers in the military community. Most people know him from the Montel Williams show that aired in the 1990s into the 2000s. Was a very successful talk show, and certainly Montel wasn't afraid to take on controversial topics on that show. And then, of course, he's been in television shows. He's been on movies. We see him being interviewed from time to time. And of course, this show has been running for a number of very successful seasons, and we were honored to be a part of that. So when we were first going into the filming of the show, you get a little bit of time to work with the star and talk with them a little bit before you get things started, and that was something that was pretty enjoyable. And my one question for Montel that I had that was sort of my own personal interest was ultimately how in the world did you get into this business? I mean, if you look at his career, if you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see that he actually retired as a lieutenant commander in the reserves in 1996, but he's doing full-time Montel Williams shows airing on national TV in 1991. So you see that he basically came from active duty and went right into the public spotlight with this television show almost right away. So I asked him the question, how in the world did that happen? And what he had explained to me is that during his time in the military, he actually had the chance to do some work with public affairs. Now, most people, when I talk to them and I say I did this show with Montel Williams, they'll always say to me, well, he was a SEAL, right? And I kind of laugh at that because no, he was not a SEAL. He was actually a cryptographics officer when he was commissioned in 1980 out of the Naval Academy. But most of America thinks he was a SEAL because he played a Navy SEAL in 3 episodes of the TV show JAG that ran in the 1990s. And he had a reprising role as that character a couple of times on there. So, but he wasn't a SEAL. But he did say that as he was doing some work with public affairs, he ended up making some connections, and there was an interest in doing public speaking, and he ended up gaining a number of public speaking engagements, topics related to leadership and some of those kinds of things. And that ultimately is what got him discovered for the show, from some of the connections that he had and people who had seen him speak, and that they had an interest in having somebody with his particular perspective to host a talk show. And obviously turned out to be an incredibly good thing. And that's actually how we got into the topic of what I learned from him. And one of the things he actually just volunteered to me as part of that process, he just volunteered it right off, was to say, one of the interesting things he had to learn coming off of active duty was how to talk to people and how to direct actions with people as a civilian, especially as a civilian working in Hollywood kinds of industries compared to what he did in the military. And what he meant by that was, as he said, in the military, we are taught whenever you're in an operations mode to be clear, to be brief, and be done. That's the idea, to clear up the communication channels. Because the essence of communications in every military operation is to make sure that it's not complicated. You want to make sure that the person receiving it hears it so that they can execute it, because obviously life and death can be the result of that on active duty. So when it came to the mode when they were shooting the Montel Williams show, and you're sitting in the studio and you've got 3 or 4 cameras around you and you've got guests coming in and out and the coordinations and making all of that stuff happen, Montel just went right into military mode, and he was just basically saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And finally, after a few episodes of shooting, his producer pulled him around and said, Montel, you got to knock this off. And he's like, what are you talking about? He said, out here we say please and thank you to people. And he says, you're barking around orders like you're some kind of drill sergeant around here, and it's ticking people off. And he said, I never realized that. He said, I wasn't being mean. He said, but just the way that it was coming off, the curt, that short, direct way of directing people to do things was rubbing people the wrong way. And what he came to realize through all of that is that civilians don't communicate in industry the same way that we do on active duty. It is much more casual and much more polite than what we do during a military operation. And that was the big deal for him that made him more effective. So from that point forward, he focused on making sure that everything it is that he said was respectful to people, that not only did he do all the other good leadership stuff that we're taught in terms of getting to know your staff, spending time with them, all of that, but really making sure that every time he asked somebody to do something, it demonstrated care for who they were as a person so that he could be effective. So again, in the military, we have one way of doing business. On the other, we have more like Dale Carnegie, if you're familiar with his work from 100 years ago, Win Friends and Influence People. And in doing that, by showing respect for other people, you're going to be able to be more effective with your civilian counterparts there and do very well as a civilian. So thanks for joining us. We appreciate your subscribing to us. Please, we ask, if you like the show, rate us online and tell your friends. But until the next time, I'm Mike Jennings, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks for joining the Military Minute. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you're notified when a new episode is released. Is there a topic or conversation you want discussed here on the show? Send it to me at scott.cunningham@militaryminute.us.